Thanks everyone for giving me a chance to tell you about what I do. I'll give you a bit of, I've not rehearsed this at all, so it's all off the cuff, but and as I said, R&D is kind of boring in a way. It kind of is, but actually there's a side to it because you get to meet so many different people in different sectors. You learn a load of stuff about each sector, so there is an exciting bit about it. But most times when somebody says what you do and you say R&D, it's just a blank face usually because nobody really knows what it means or what it is. So if I go a little bit about my background first, I started off in the motor trade, which was service side, then sales, became a sales manager, what was All Saints Vauxhall up the road here, but originally I started off in Birmingham, and then moved into telecoms, which is a complete move away from that towards the late 90s. So similar to the kind of stuff Steve does, I was involved in telecom solutions for businesses, so that was putting phone systems in, all those sort of things. I had a little business doing that after a few years of working for other people. I then moved away from that business and I was involved in two lots of things, motor trade and telecoms, which was really confusing, but it seemed to work all right. Then I started to do some events, which were a thing called Bromsgrove Day of Kindness. Started to want to know a little bit about, well, years and years ago I wanted to know what on earth am I here for, what am I doing here, and I won't go on about that now, but I got into that and really wanted to know, which led me into Bromsgrove Day of Kindness and various other things. As time went by, I continued to do telecom work and then started to do some marketing work for a friend of mine who had a business in telecoms but had an aneurysm and he needed some help, so I started to help him out. I then got involved in another company that was helping out marketing wise in terms of telemarketing, so that became a thing, and I think because I always got my own business in anyway, it was kind of easy, it was no problem, so I started to do that for 2 or 3 different businesses. And then I joined a networking group which was known, some of you guys may have heard of it, it's not around anymore, it was called The Plan, and it was on a Wednesday night once every month, and I went there, I found I knew a few people from 20 odd years before, so there was a gentleman there by the name of Paul Wallace who I work with now, and he just said to me, what do you like at writing? And I think I'm alright. He said, do you fancy writing some reports? So, and this was for R&D, so that's what got me into R&D. So initially it was starting to write reports that would be based around the projects that people are doing. So if somebody was producing a new way of making fans in a factory, they'd want to make a claim, well I'd write the report for them, which would involve their technical advances, the problems they had to overcome to get there, then that would go away with the claim over to HMRC. So that's a very, very quick background for me. So R&D, so what we do is we help people to make claims that go against their corporation tax. So it sounds really simple, that, doesn't it? It is. So if somebody makes a claim, it will be reduced from their corporation tax. We generally work with people who, well, we can work with anybody, but generally it's engineering companies, manufacturers, software companies. We work with agricultural companies, well, farmers, people like that, people who are doing stuff with chemicals and producing new chemicals and things like that. So, so those are the kind of people I want to speak to, but it's anybody really. So, if you have a company who feels that they're making an advancement in their sector, so what HMRC are looking for is it's sector advancement, and it's got to be technical, technological, or scientific. So I'm trying to think of an example of it. So if there was a manufacturer who, and often they don't know they're doing this because it's their everyday job, might be doing the process all the way through to making a new manufacturing part for a car, maybe, or for a manufacturer of a vehicle. And they may have produced a way of doing this quicker, of making something heat up more quickly, or making something quicker, making something smaller in a new way. And they're probably doing it in some cases and don't realise they're actually doing R&D, research and development. They don't know because it's what they're doing all the time. So sometimes we'll get to talk to them, and our job really is to help advise. At one time our world was filled with businesses similar to our own, but that sold it as like a sales job. So you get a phone call in saying, have you thought about doing R&D before? And the answer might be no. And they'd say, well, we can get you 40 grand back off your corporation tax. And obviously that gets interesting for whoever's on the phone. But how on earth would they know? You know, they don't know anything about the company, what they make or anything like that. So I believe that's still happening a little bit now. But HMRC jumped all over the scheme when Brexit came, because the money that used to come from the scheme came a lot from Europe, and it doesn't anymore. So they clamped down on how things were done. So if you get phoned up by anybody that says we'll get your money back for your R&D, I wouldn't deal with them. I know that I'm supposed to say that because we'd want to work with you, but the job is a proper job of finding out if somebody's doing some genuine research and development. So the genuine research and development is you get to this point where you think you may have done something new, or you've produced a new process, and it's about what's being done in your sector. So what the HMRC are looking for, if they're going to reward you with some money back off your corporation tax, is if the technology or the science in your sector is, say, it's there, and you've produced something that's taken it that little bit further forward. You've done something that can do something more quickly. You've produced a new product that if it's in engineering, it heats something up more quickly. That's what they're looking for. And then the next thing they're looking for is the technical uncertainties and scientific uncertainties that you had to get to that stage. So what we do, we take you through this process where initially it's a phone call, a conversation, perhaps 2 phone calls. If you've got some projects you want to talk about, we list the projects down with you, and we'll talk about the ones that you feel are the strongest. We then take that to the next part of the process, which is a technical interview, which can be done physically or over Zoom. And we'll go through each project, and in most cases many people are doing some form of R&D, but again, it might be, if it's only new within your business, if it's something you've done that's new but it can be found outside that other people are doing it, then we'd advise of making no claim. Of course, in some situations you've got people who've developed something new but they wouldn't have advertised it because they were not going to give it away, they're not going to give away their secrets, so there's still a chance to make a claim. So it's technical advancements in your sector. It's got to be a technical advancement. So a good example of that would be software companies might create something fantastic for a website, and it will be the first time you go on it, you'll go onto the website and you think, wow, this is doing something really new. I've never seen it done like this before, which is all really good, but it's what HMRC are looking for when they receive a claim, and if they look at it, because they won't look at every single claim, they're looking for the technical bit. So it's the bit that was coded in the case of software. So if the coding that someone's done is pretty much standard coding, then if they get to look at it, it's likely to be turned down as a claim. So until last year, until last April, you were able to continue to make a claim over and over again whenever you wanted to. Anybody new going to the scheme after last April, they have to put a pre-notification in. This is one of the new rules that HMRC put in. So the idea is that I would imagine they will have an AI system that will be looking at the form that goes in, and it will be picking out the information that's on this form to pre-notify. And if HMRC think, look, this hasn't got enough R&D in it, it's not deep enough, it's been done before, it can be turned down. But if you're a business that's done it in the last 3 years, you can still just make a claim and input the claim. Can I ask, does anybody know anybody who makes an R&D claim? Any businesses that do? I know that you mentioned you have, yeah. Is anybody else aware of that? Has anybody been aware of the R&D tax credit scheme? No, okay. But if anybody knows anybody who's in engineering, or people who make things or are involved in processes, they're the kind of people we like to talk to, and we do it properly. If we talk to somebody and we think that, look, you're working well, your work's really good. Unfortunately, we've had to do this with some of our older clients now since the changes that have been made to the scheme. If your work's really good, but it's, you're making a new bracket and it's fantastic, it does a new thing, but what did you have to do to make the bracket? And if it was drill a couple of holes, bend it a different way, it might be doing something new at that end, but at the technical end, it's just everyday work. So it's really important, if you know anybody who's doing that, they talk to the right people to make sure it's looked over correctly. We can't know everybody's sector. We can't know, if somebody's going to sit with us, they know more about their business than we do. But what we do know about is R&D, and we have to go by what the person tells us and then work with them from there. But we work from the very beginning right to the end, so it's all done in-house. We're a really small team, so there's some really big companies out there doing this. And it might be thought that the big companies are the best, but the big companies have massive overheads and masses of people ringing up people to say, we'll sell you our R&D services. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. It's just that in the last 3 years, the inspections have been ramped up by HMRC. So what you need is a properly filled out form that goes into HMRC first, a proper report written, which takes some doing. It's not something you can just do overnight. You have to get quite good at doing it, and some proper consultancy, and that's what we're all about. So I don't know if I've made that clear. It's really difficult to actually put R&D over in 10-15 minutes because it goes under lots of different layers. But has anything there, because this might help me, raised any questions? Maybe even, I don't know what you're talking about, it might be helpful, I don't know.
Phil, if you don't think that anyone's done anything in your sector, are you having to look globally for anyone who's done something that might do a similar job or a similar approach?
That's what they'd be looking at. I mean, it's a difficult thing because when you look globally, there's going to be somebody out there, isn't there, doing what you've done. There's a good chance that somebody out there is going to be doing something quite similar. But as I said, it's unlikely that if it is pretty clever, they're not going to advertise it out there anywhere. I'll give you a little example of, I can't tell you can I tell you the business? So it's all private, so we don't tell anybody the companies, but we've been quite fortunate as an organisation, keeping fingers crossed. We've had very little in the way of inspections done. And we know of 2 or 3 businesses where they've been in a lot of trouble, big ones, where they've had that many reports in. Obviously over the years they've put lots and lots of claims in. And if they've gone in without reports and they get picked up later on, because you could at one time put reports in, a claim in without a report with it. So basically you're just changing the amount of money on your corporation tax return. You could do that at one time. Obviously in those situations, if it's 3 years ago, suddenly someone's got to write a report based on work done 3 years ago. So we've had a client who has had an inspection done. They are definitely what HMRC are looking for is competent professionals. That's one of their phrases they want you to use. So you've got to be a competent professional. And they claim they weren't competent professionals, but they clearly were. You know, there's no reason why they weren't. And they produced a picture and sent it back and said, here's a picture of a machine that does what you say you're doing. But when we went back to our clients and we were talking to the client, our client specialises in a certain way of doing things. And that machine turns out a product 24 hours a day, all night. And what these guys do is something very different. So it was really clear that HMRC didn't really know what they were talking about because they'd presented a machine that really, although it was the same industry, bore no resemblance to this person's business. So it's quite likely that in that situation, yeah, you're looking at globally, but we've come in more into Europe when we've had our inspection, and they didn't look at it so much globally. We've actually taken it globally in this inspection because we've taken it to American companies and compared it for them. So, but what they'd done was they'd introduced a German machine and said this does what yours does, and it didn't. So yeah, you've got to have it in mind globally, but here's one thing that's true. If we thought like that all the time, in as much as, well, everybody's going to be doing something else, nobody would ever be able to make a claim. You'd have to invent something absolutely brand new. And how likely is that for most people who are SMEs and what have you? It's more likely they're going to be doing a new process, probably something that you do get involved in sometimes. But you know, it's going to be a new process that produces something at the end. I'm trying to think of things that might be relevant. I mean, probably you won't know that many people doing stuff that you feel would be R&D work, but it can relate to anybody. So if you know anybody who doesn't know about the R&D scheme and doesn't really know what it is, it's easy to sit down and talk to somebody directly about their own work. To do it like this it's fairly difficult because you know I'm talking about all different industries. When you sit with somebody who's an engineer, it's much easier. But often people don't realise they're doing that kind of work. They just think they're experts in what they do, and they're just doing what they do. And it'd be good to have an opportunity to speak to anybody that you know. But I don't know how clear I've been there. Was that any good, Steve? I don't know.
Good.
Was that helpful? No other questions? I'd love a question that stumbles me because it would help me to explain it better. But I could tell you about all the changes that have happened. Second, sorry. I want Louise. 23, 24, something like that. Yeah, so there's been loads of changes in the scheme that have toughened it up. We've become members of what's known as the R&D community. So it's basically companies that want to do it right and work with HMRC so that all the standards are correct. It's been made more difficult for people to make a claim, and kind of rightly so in some ways, because believe it or not, there were pubs putting in claims for changes to the menu and getting paid. Things like that were going on. So you can understand why HMRC have jumped on it and said, right, we're not doing that anymore. The only criticism you could have of that is it was left alone for 20 years to do whatever anybody wanted to do. And then suddenly HMRC jump on it and make it really difficult for everybody and make it tough. And, you know, it's what happens. But, you know, I think it'll even out and it'll get easier and easier. There's all new safeguards in place now. So I think as we move forward, it will be good. And it really is a good little scheme. It's a way of, you know, a company that's put all their efforts in, and they should be rewarded. You know, if a company in the UK is doing something new and presenting something new that takes on all the other countries, companies around the world, then yeah, it's a chance to have a nice little reward. It's a little bit of money back off your corporation tax. And you know, if it's a small company, it's a small amount. But we deal with some big companies as well, and some real big chunks of money can come back. You know, it's well worth doing. It's well worth the conversation. And sometimes, unfortunately, the conversation is we don't feel like you should make a claim, but then other times it's looking quite good. But the point when we say it's looking quite good, we then become, you know, real diggers. You got to dig and make sure you're getting all the real information. So again, there you go. If you know anybody who does anything really, I'll speak to them. But generally, engineering, manufacturing, software, you know, we're into all of that, and it'd be great to speak to them. So I don't know how helpful that was.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks a lot.